have that opportunity. Sometimes, as a church family, and even in our own families, we become very set in the way things need to be. And we assume that they're always one way. Well, part of life is changing, right? Part of life is learning how to do new things and to do things differently. And so part of our tradition at Cornerstone is nothing is permanent except God. How about that? That's scary to even me. Because I charged Pastor Brian with a task this week. I said, Pastor Brian, would you please decorate the set? Knowing that I couldn't be here. And for those of you who know me well, know that I'm very particular in the way I like things done.
No.
I know, I hide it now. I hide it. I really do. I try to keep that under wraps. And no, it could be a control thing. It could be a little bit more than that. But often when I have a vision of what we're trying to go for, I am very picky. And so I told Brian, send me pictures as you go. He sent me pictures at the end. And I had one response. I love it. I love it. And it was very, very true. And I meant that, and I proved that I loved it because it didn't change anything. So often, we know what we want, we know how it should be, we know how it should go, regardless of whether that matches up to reality. And so what we're going to look at throughout this season of Advent, our series is Celebrating Christmas Together. We're going to celebrate together because there are a lot of problems that we face. There are a lot of things that we go through. One of the things that we should be able to do at church is to celebrate together. And so I want you to understand that our focus throughout the season of Advent is a celebration as family, praising God. It's one of the best things that we can do. And so we're going to start today with a call that may not seem very Christmassy. It may not seem like something that we would preach because so often at Christmas we assume that we should turn to Matthew, we should turn to Luke, and to read the birth of Jesus, and we will get there. But to start, we start with a more basic theme. We start with the theme of hope. It was something that the church has needed throughout time. And when I talk to church, I mean we think the church within Christianity, but also the Israelites needed hope. And our reading today comes from the prophet Isaiah. It's Isaiah chapter 2, right near the beginning of Isaiah, almost in the middle of your Bible. It's Isaiah 2, verses 1 through 5. And the Israelites are in a place where they needed hope. They needed something to draw them back, something to reunite them to where they were. It's Isaiah chapter 2, the first 5 verses. And the subtitle here is The Mountain of the Lord. We sang about the mountain today, right? Loving to go to the mountain. Well, here it is. This is what Isaiah, son of Amos, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. So Isaiah has a vision. And his vision is of Judah and of Jerusalem. And he writes, in the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as chief among the mountains. It's going to be the biggest mountain. It will stand above everything, above all the other mountains. God's mountain will stand higher. It will be raised above the hills, and all nations will stream to it. Many peoples will come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, so that we may walk in his paths. The law will go out from Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He will judge between the nations and will settle disputes for many peoples. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. Come, O house of Jacob, let us walk in the light of the Lord. What a passage of hope as we move into Advent. What a passage that is so appropriate in this time in the world as there is much chaos and concern. Fear of war, fear of things happening and going poorly. And what Isaiah tells the people, because they were used to this, is there is coming a day when that will no longer happen. When that will no longer be the norm. In fact, it will be such a different day that all of the weapons that you have, can be destroyed. Think about that. What a major change from what Israel knew and from what we know. And so there are many things that we learn from this passage. And one of the first things that I want you to pull out here is that there is coming a day when Mount Zion will be raised higher than any other mountain. What does that mean? Well, we're talking about Mount Zion. We're talking about God's mountain. And what Isaiah is saying here that he saw in his vision is that this mountain is physically bigger and larger than everything else around it. What's the point in that? Everyone can see it. Because sometimes it felt to Israel, and it feels to us, that our God gets lost in the shuffle. That God is just one of many things that compete for first place in our life. And so Isaiah sees a day when that is no longer the case. When it's no longer, it looks like you can pick from any, there will just be one that ascends, and it is the mountain of God. It's an amazing picture. Imagine this in your vision. Imagine God giving you this vision and seeing this. No wonder Isaiah wants to share it, because its prominence will be evident to everyone, not just Israel. If you think about it, we have things in our life that are very important to us. Very sacred spots in our life. There are a few different places in my life that I can think of that I love to go that are just absolutely sacred to me. It seems that in that place, everything else stops, and God is given the moment to speak. Do you have any places like that in your life? Any places where you can think of where you go and you're able to just focus on God? For me, I have several that take place in different places throughout the year, but one of my favorites truly is in archery season. I know you wouldn't think of hunting as a connection with God. But as I'm out there in the woods and quiet and by myself, and I can't talk on the phone, and some of the places I go have no reception, so even if I wanted to, I couldn't. It is one of the great times where I am quiet and God is able to speak. Isaiah is saying there is coming a day when everyone will be able to hear God in that way. And it's exciting because here they are, they're in the midst of struggles. Things are not going the way they want them to be. And it's a reminder that someday it'll change. That someday it will be different. And we all go through problems. We all go through struggles. We all have challenges in our life that we wish we're not going through. Anyone have any that they wish that if they could just pass those off? That's the hope. The hope is that God will put an end to these problems. And it's this amazing hope. Israel needed it. We need it today. It will be so life-changing. It will be so evident to all the peoples of the earth that they're actually going to begin journeying to God's mountain. Now, this seems rather straightforward, but it's bigger than what it seems. It's all the peoples of the earth. So think about that. All of the tribes, all of the countries, all of the nations are actually going to begin, whenever that day comes and the mountain is ascended, everyone will begin making their way to God's mountain. It's actually very exciting because in this day, so often your God changed depending upon who was ruling you. Or your God changed depending upon the border of the country you were in. Or your God changed depending upon what you needed to do and who you needed to please. And if the king said it needed to be this way, then it was. Isaiah is saying there is coming a day where instead of us having to turn or this struggle, everyone will come to our God. Everyone will come and begin to make their way as a special trek to worship God. Now, we don't think much about that because we travel so easily, right? We jump in our cars, we go anywhere we want to go. In fact, this week, Jen and I jumped in the car. We went to Apollo to have Thanksgiving with her family on Thanksgiving Day. We jumped in the truck and went to Beaver to have Thanksgiving with my family on Saturday. And we think nothing about it. We think nothing about getting in the car and going because it is so easy. But the journey that we took Thursday and the journey that we took Saturday did not always happen without modern transportation. To go 80 miles or 100 miles each way, that was a long trip. That was a long venture, and there was no dream of airplanes, right? So you couldn't jump and see family across the country or around the world. Isaiah is talking about something that they won't just see on Facebook, they won't just see through the news media. They'll actually be able to see and experience, and it will draw them in. Pretty exciting, because everyone is coming into God's mountain. And they're coming in to learn God's way. In fact, some versions actually have to learn God's Torah, which was the law, the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible. They were coming in to learn what God teaches. And part of that, and it's a theme that runs throughout the book of Isaiah, is bringing all nations in. And there's 2 things that happen in Isaiah: judgment and salvation. 2 of the themes that run throughout the entire book of Isaiah. Now, there is judgment in the fact that there is no more war, that there are things to be atoned for, that the sins that we have committed must be dealt with. But there is this message of hope. Not only is there the judgment, but there is this message of hope that as everyone comes in, there is actually salvation for everyone who is coming. Now, that is not actually something that we talk about often in the Old Testament, but this is one of the places that we do. Because in Isaiah chapter 2, Isaiah has this vision of people coming in and salvation going out to all the peoples of the world, not just Israel. Because up until this time, the only people who could really have a connection with Yahweh were the Israelites. And you had to basically be born into it. It means everyone else was excluded. And so there was coming a day when all those who had been excluded, when all those who were no longer welcome, were brought in. Imagine the entire world praising God. It's pretty exciting, isn't it? Yeah, it's something to look forward to. There is hope. And verse 5 is actually a tough one. Verse 5 is a real tough one, because we don't like to think about it this way, but we're going to go into a bit of Israel's story. Isaiah actually invites Israel back to the mountain. That verse 5, it says, "Come, O house of Jacob, let us walk in the light of the Lord." It is a statement of judgment and salvation all in one. They have not been walking in the light of the Lord. In fact, they have been doing everything they wanted to do. And what we read of Israel throughout the entire time, from Exodus up till now, is this progressive journey away from God. If you go all the way back to Exodus chapter 13, as Moses and ultimately God is leading the people out of slavery. It's Exodus 13, 21, 22. You read these amazing 2 verses. "By day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people." It is this amazing vision of God Himself leading all of the people out. And they were to be His people, and He was to be their God. That was the plan. We don't get too far away until the people say, "We are terrified. Moses, go for us." And they begin this journey of stepping back, of stepping away from God. "Moses, go for us. Moses, do this for us." And so they begin and they progress through prophets. Then you get to the book of Judges, and we have the judges who are ruling. And one of the most memorable verses out of Judges is Judges chapter 21, verse 25. "In those days Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. Another translation, everyone did as they saw right in their own eyes. It is this progressive transition of the people of God backing away from God. And we know the story as we read it, the people of Israel continued to cry out, God, we want a king. We want to be like the other nations. God, we want what they have. They've got it good. Now look what they're passing up on. They're passing up on God and saying, we want to be like the Joneses. We want a match. We want a king. We want an earthly king right here. God, please, please, please give us a king. And how well did that work out for them? Not so well. Because as they have kings, they go to war. They begin fighting and battling, and they become exactly what they prayed for. They become like everyone else. And so there is this progressive journey of Israel moving away from God. And we would skip over this in verse 5 and say, oh yeah, Israel's invited too. This is as much a calling for Israel to return to God as it is a promise that all the other nations will be able to come to God. It is a message of hope, because there is nothing worse than feeling far away from God and feeling disconnected. And if you have been close and you have backslid or you have walked away, it's quite painful. It's empty. And part of the hope is that you're never too far from God. There's a lot in these 5 verses. There's a lot in this passage. And there's so much to this candle of hope. We often reduce hope to the things that we want for Christmas, or to the things our kids want for Christmas. And Alex this year, I mean, you see him when he comes up here just about every Sunday, and he gives Daddy a hug and a kiss, and I think that's awesome. He has really grasped the concept of presents at Christmas this year. I don't think he knows quite where they come from, but he is really excited. And he's been asking for presents because he's seen a couple things wrapped in the house. In fact, one of them he carried upstairs. It was his cousin's. Carried it all the way. The box was bigger than him. Managed to lug it up around the stairs, took it to Jen, and said, Mommy, my present? No, not your present, but thanks for playing. We'll put that back. We think of hope in just the little things that we want. Or we think of hope for getting through the problem that we are going through. And that is hope, and that is fine. But in the Christian faith, there's much more. There is much more. There is hope for this eternity, hope for salvation, hope that we can actually have a relationship with God that is perhaps closer than we've ever had in our life. And so as we are in this Advent season, it's time to have a real honest conversation. God, am I really walking with you? Am I really drawing my strength from you? Or God, are there other things in my heart that have really taken first place? God, when I see you, am I running to the mountain? Or am I walking away? It's a reminder of hope. That no matter where we are, God always draws us and beckons us to Him. Beyond that, Isaiah has a huge concept of God's sovereignty. Isaiah truly understands that God is not just God of the Israelites. God is God of all the nations. Now, we say that so often that I don't think it has the impact that perhaps it did as Isaiah's readers were reading this. But Isaiah was saying to all of the Israelites, God, of course, is God over Israel. But God is also God over Assyria. What do you know of the Assyrians that conquered Israel? God is also God over Babylon. What do you know about Babylon? Also conquered. God is also God over Persia. No one liked the Persians. And yet God was God over them too, according to Isaiah. And Isaiah was right. We think about this, but we often fail to proclaim it. We look at the problems in our world and we just say, it's so big, what can we do? And we throw our hands up. Isaiah said, no, there is hope here. In fact, there is so much hope here because God is God over all, that someday when the judgment comes and the salvation is here, let me tell you how the world will change. It will change so drastically that every sword will be beat into a plowshare. And every spear will be turned into a pruning hook. If you're to take, and iron was so precious in that day. You know, we go to Home Depot, buy any gardening tool we want. We can go to sporting stores and buy any kind of weapon that we basically are legally allowed to buy. And if you can't buy it, I'm sure there are YouTube videos teaching you how to make it. We have so much access to stuff that we have. Metal was precious. And to take your only weapon and to turn it into something capable for farming, that was to say, I will never need this again. To turn it into something that you could use in an agricultural setting, it was to say there is no longer any threat or fear of violence in the world. Wouldn't that be awesome? It's not because humanity gets it right, but it's because God leads the way. And God is God over all. Now I want you to hear this because it changes our perspective on hope. What are we hoping for this Christmas? What are we hoping for this Advent season? If you're sitting there thinking about just stuff, it's part of it, but I'm hoping there's more. And part of the reason we do our Advent candles is because almost every one of us have loved ones who don't know Christ. Almost every one of us have loved ones who are really suffering or enduring hardship. Are we praying for them? Are we doing our best to minister to them? If they don't know Christ, are we doing our best to share the gospel with them? Not just in the words that we say, but in the way that we live. Because as Israel was coming back, one of the things they had to relearn was God's law. They had moved so far away, they forgot what God's way looks like. And so it's a reminder for all the nations, but also for Israel, that God is never too far. It's something that I feel that we have to be vigilant in our own life about. Wherever we are, there's always an opportunity to come back to God. And if it's been a long time and you've kind of slid away, today's a good opportunity. If you're just catching yourself, then it's a good opportunity. Or if you have never made that commitment, it's a great opportunity. And it's also one of the greatest gifts you can pass on to those around who you know and love, or maybe not even like. Because God is also their God too, right?
Amen.
So if you're sitting here saying, God, I am convinced that I love you, that I've given my life to you, begin to think of those who are around you. Begin to think those who you know who do not know Christ, and perhaps be praying for a chance this Advent season to witness to them, to share the message of Christ with them this Advent season, and to bring true hope into their life. I think we're in a good spot to stop today on hope. An amazing reminder that God is God of all, and that God will draw all to Him. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for today. We thank you for this time together and this opportunity to read from the prophet Isaiah. To read the message that he had for Israel so long ago. A message that did contain judgment, but also contained hope. God, how we need your hope on a daily basis. God, draw us to you. Help us to walk with you each and every moment, to get our strength from you, and to live in your way each and every day. Father, thank you for this Advent season, for the fact that you sent your Messiah, and that he is returning again. Amen. If you are having